can't look at the rocket launch, the trophy wives of the astronauts, and I won't listen to their words, 'cause I like birds.
All right, we're rocking and rolling. All right, thank you for having me this evening. This was a great excuse to come down to the coast, and I was able to meet with a bunch of supporters and partners and staff. I actually came down to Charleston yesterday, and I'll go back tomorrow, so this was a good excuse, and I'm glad I could have an opportunity to chat with y'all tonight. Let me be clear, I'm a fairly casual presenter. I actually really hate people with too many slides. And I like to fall asleep during conference presentations. So I will try to keep this as dynamic as we can. If you have questions or comments during any of this, I mean, we're a small group tonight, jump in, okay? My goal is to introduce you to myself. I'm new in this role, so a lot of our supporters and fellow birders across the state are still getting to know me. I also want to introduce you to Audubon, South Carolina, tell you more about what we do. It's not just bird watching. And so we have a slew of programs and staff and initiatives that I want to share with you tonight. And then, hopefully you'll leave tonight learning a little bit more about us, hopefully becoming a little more engaged with our group as well, and we can continue to partner on things in the future, okay? So I'll start just telling you a little bit about me. This is month 13, we're still in April, okay, month 13. It took them a while to actually talk me into this position. I was very happy in my last role. I've spent the last 20 years working in conservation in various capacities in South Carolina. Throughout that time, I mean, I've worked with Audubon South Carolina for the last 15 or so. And they're a fantastic group. But I was like, y'all do a lot. This is going to be a big role. But overall, the staff were fantastic, and they talked me into it. And then I also said, Audubon South Carolina is very unique in the fabric of conservation organizations in South Carolina because we do so much, and we have the potential to do so much, to address so many threats, to go after so many opportunities, and really build on that. And that was what got me to leave. I had been at Conservation Voters of South Carolina before this. I spent the last 10 years working in the political environmental space. I was an environmental lobbyist at the South Carolina State House. Had a very successful tenure with that. I can get very passionate about politics in South Carolina and how conservation friendly we are as a state. When I left that organization, I was the deputy director, and I had built it from a staff of 4 to a staff of 17, tripled our budget, done a lot of really cool stuff with that. And luckily, we're still able to partner with that organization and do really good stuff. So I've got experience as a state regulator. I've got experience working for national and state nonprofits in South Carolina. And so it was really nice to be able to take that experience and bring it to the team at Audubon, South Carolina. So I do live in Columbia. I've been in Columbia for the last, we're at 18, 20 years in there. And I'm from Atlanta originally. I'm very based in the Southeast. I have family across the Carolinas and Georgia. And so, it's good to be able to kind of take everything I've learned and apply it to South Carolina and make this a good state for all of us, all right? So, I'm approaching this from a, who is Audubon, okay? I'm assuming you don't know much about us. I'm taking that assumption. Birds are telling us a lot right now. We have lost 3 billion, yes, since 1970. 3 billion birds in North America since 1970. We are at a very scary point in terms of the health of our bird populations, and they're a bellwether. The canary in the coal mine is not just a phrase. They're an indicator of the health of our environment. For instance, particularly eastern forests are threatened. We're losing these habitats at an alarming rate. In particular, this bird is the Bachman's warbler. So this was a forest species from South Carolina. It is now extinct. And we've lost lots of birds And we're still continuing to lose them in South Carolina. So yeah, we're at a turning point. And so that brings in Audubon. And we're looking at kind of what we're particularly facing in South Carolina. That's my role. And we'll talk about how that fits into the broader Audubon quilt. All right. How many people are from South Carolina in this room? Yeah. People really like us. People really like us here. We're really popular. People like to move to South Carolina. That's great. That's awesome. It's also terrifying. We're also continuing to make babies. We're also continuing to grow as a population ourselves. So our population has increased 11 out of the last 12 years. These are just some, I'm not going to throw a lot of text at you tonight, I promise. This is the most text-heavy slide. But I thought these statistics were really interesting to share. In 2023, we were the fastest growing state in the country. We just got some really fascinating farmland statistics out of the American Farmland Trust. From 2001 to 2011, we lost 11 million acres of farmland in America. That's stunning. But in South Carolina, we lost almost 300,000 acres. Terrifying, okay? Sea level rise. Well, y'all are on the coast. You've seen some of the changes we're starting to experience. So sea level rise, we're already a foot higher, and we expect to go up more. That's a big deal. Even just 1 or 2 feet is going to have huge impacts on how we live on the South Carolina coast. It's getting warmer. That has huge impacts for species. So we are, and we're seeing more frequent and intense storms. Okay, so we are already seeing the impacts of climate change in South Carolina, and while we're seeing those impacts that are fairly scary, we are bringing more people into that land, and we're putting more people in harm's way. We're putting more pressures on the environment, and this is important for us to just understand what we are dealing with. Okay, so these are some of the threats, and I promise I'm not going to be negative Nancy for this whole presentation, but I wanted to bring up some of these things that the staff at Audubon South Carolina are thinking about every day and how we are going to solve for them. And this map is old from 2008, but it's just interesting to see how popular the Southeast is. Okay, so that color, if you look on the Texas, beat us out beyond the Southeast, but we were right behind it. Okay, so Audubon. How many of y'all are familiar with Audubon? Okay, National Audubon Society. Okay, Audubon, John James Audubon. Okay. So we're over 100 years old. We're an old nonprofit. Our phrase is where birds thrive, people prosper. We expand the Western Hemisphere. Okay, so National Audubon Society is not only a big international environmental organization that's over 100 years old. We also have roughly 700 to 800 staff. We have offices from Chile to the boreal forest of Canada. We have slowly but surely been expanding across the Western Hemisphere because we can work all day long to protect our migratory species in South Carolina, but as soon as they leave South Carolina, what about where they're going? What about their rest stops? What about their other breeding and nesting grounds? Are they okay? And so we have been using the science, we're gonna talk some more about that, to look at where they are going and how we can protect them beyond just the place we're in today. And also we are a big seasoned organization. We have the expertise and we can do this. All right, so South Carolina. Okay, so some people get confused about the infrastructure of Audubon, okay? So y'all have heard about Audubon chapters? Yeah, okay. So National Audubon Society is the overarching 501c3, okay? That my paycheck comes from National Audubon Society. So I actually have two roles. I'm executive director of Audubon South Carolina, and I serve as a vice president of National Audubon Society. There are about 60 other vice presidents across the Western Hemisphere. Some of them focus on topics like water or climate. And then some of them run state and regional programs like mine. So I run the state office for the organization. We have been around since the 1970s. And we'll talk a little bit about, some folks are familiar with like Beidler Forest and some of the other things that we started back then. We have about 30,000 active members in South Carolina, and then we have chapters and bird clubs. Chapters are separate 501c3s. We're friends, we're like cousins, like they have to go through kind of an application process to be an Audubon chapter, and they can apply for grants from National Audubon Society and they get support, but like we can't control them, okay? So I wanna be clear that we are separate nonprofits. And we've got tons across South Carolina. Y'all may be familiar, there's one based in Charleston. We also have campus chapters. That's one area that the team is getting very excited about. So our University of South Carolina, Furman University are a couple of them. Our most recent campus chapter additions they're working on one at Coastal Carolina University in the North Coast, and then Claflin University. Y'all familiar with Claflin? Yeah, it's an old, historically black college university in like Orangeburg. Okay, so it's very close to one of our sanctuaries. We've been able to use our sanctuary as a demonstration site for those students. We've actually helped reinvigorate our biology department, and we have a new campus chapter there. So we're actively actually trying to work more with HBCUs to create campus chapters. And then we have 2 nature centers and sanctuaries. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit more later about what we're doing there, but right now, who's familiar with Beidler Forest? A few fans, okay. And then Silver Bluff. See, we don't market Silver Bluff enough. So Beidler Forest was our first sanctuary. It is probably the closest to you. It's mainly in Dorchester County. It also covers some Orangeburg and Berkeley County. So it's in the swamp, okay, between here and Columbia, off 26. And it's about 18,000 acres. It turns 50 years old on May 11th, which I'll tell you some more about. And then Silver Bluff is 3,400 acres on the beautiful 50-foot bluffs of the Savannah River, just south of Augusta, Georgia. So on the South Carolina side of the Savannah, it's 3,400 acres, very different habitat. Dude, they're super cool. Both sanctuaries are fantastic. So I know Silver Bluff is gonna be a bit of a haul for y'all, but I recommend going out there if you can, and I will tease you more with that later. All right, we are led by science. We're updating some maps, so I just threw this one up as an example, but science leads our work, okay? We're not just throwing darts at the map, we are looking at what the birds are telling us. The important thing for this map, and I know that's terrible to look at these things on slides, but on the left, green is high value for carbon, like that red orangish is high value for birds, and purple is high value for both, okay? Look at how much more on the side so for maintaining habitat versus restoring habitat, okay? If we restore habitat, we can increase value for carbon, birds, and both in South Carolina. Okay, so we are looking at these sorts of things, evaluating habitat, looking at how we can restore bird habitat in South Carolina, okay? So we'll get to, I talked to you about the threats. So now it's a discussion about priorities and opportunities. Climate change. We are actively addressing how we can work on climate change in South Carolina. One of the best ways we can do that right now is energy generation and transmission policy. I'm sure y'all are actively following everything the state legislature is doing, right? Right? Yeah. There's only a couple of weeks left of the legislative session, and there's a massive fight between utilities and clean energy advocates. Utilities are trying to roll back solar policy in South Carolina, clean energy policy in South Carolina, lean into natural gas generation, which, whatever, it's very expensive. It's an incredibly expensive commodity right now. And they want to build a new natural gas plant going right through a really awesome protected space in the ACE Basin, so the Ashley, Combahee, Edisto, right? Okay, so right in the middle of the ACE Basin in a town called Canadees. That's where they want to build a new gas plant. So there are going to be some serious implications from that while we're choosing to not invest in renewables. So we're actively engaging in that, for instance. We're bringing science to the conversation about transmission and generation, and we have a policy team at the State House. So we have a team of policy experts and a lobbyist. We are, driving state and federal funding for land protection. So in South Carolina, we own or manage 30,000 acres of land between those sanctuaries I mentioned and some other parts of the state. We look at large land holdings, how we can have contiguous habitat, et cetera. And that's one thing we're working on is driving additional land protection. We don't need to be the ones that own all the land in South Carolina or that are protecting all of it, but working with our partners to drive that funding. We're forging new partnerships. We're actually going to be doing some additional hiring to help us build more partnerships with the communities in which we work. We have a lot of great bird scientists. We need some more people on our staff. And land management and restoration. And we'll dig into that as this goes, but on those 30,000 acres, we manage every single acre for bird habitat. And that is a science in and of itself. And we are building out our Healthy Forest and Grasslands Protections Program. So you know how I talked about farmland earlier? That's the last remaining grassland habitat in South Carolina. So it's incredibly important to that portfolio. And then we're working on statewide land use planning and policy, which, we talked about all these people moving in. We have to figure out bird habitat, but we also have to figure out people habitat. We will not have land to protect if we do not figure out how to use the land well to house people. So, we're starting to talk about things like housing policy, land use policy, things like that across the state. And then coastal resilience and stewardship. We brought Abby tonight. Abby Burke is our coastal stewardship coordinator. She's her first month? Yeah. Yeah, it just started. So, and we'll be talking about that more. All right, so climate. When we talk about climate change and how we're addressing that at Audubon, we do focus on energy policy mainly. We're focused on energy generation, okay? Now, that also involves things like energy efficiency, but at its root, we have to address our generation sources. Like, we can all drive electric vehicles all day and reduce emissions, and that's fantastic. But if that energy that is coming out of the plug is still coming from dirty energy sources that are, emitting pollutants into our atmosphere, you still have a problem, okay? And that's the biggest opportunity we have right now in South Carolina. So for instance, going back to the science, when we see an increase in those temperatures as we see climate change get worse and temperatures increase, we're going to change the range of these birds. And we are going to mess up this whole migratory system we're trying to protect. So like I said, we are working actively on energy legislation. If you are interested, if you're a voter in South Carolina or you just want to talk to your lawmaker that covers this area anyway, now is the time. Like, the Senate is actively debating legislation. And what's happening is it's all coming from a perspective of they want increased economic development, and industries are complaining that the utilities are not giving them consistent energy sources, but that's a utility problem. Utilities have to figure out their business model. They have to figure out how to reinvest in their grid and address transmission issues, and they're refusing. They just want to build more plants. The nuclear plant failed, now they want to build a gas plant. They're not rethinking their business model. So there are a lot of issues we're working to address there, and our policy team is on it. We also are trying to support new energy projects in the state, and we also work with our federal delegation. Luckily, we are a national nonprofit, so we can work at the state level with state leaders and lawmakers, but we can also work with federal. Any questions so far? Okay. And then also we're guiding state leadership. Did y'all know that South Carolina created an Office of Resilience? Yeah, new state agency. So, and this was something, if Honestly, we would not have the South Carolina Office of Resilience if it were not for Audubon's contract lobbyist, Trip King, living legend. He got it through during the midst of COVID, and kept the eye on the prize to like get it through kind of some of that chaos. So essentially what happened, so y'all are familiar with the North Coast, like Horry County area. They have a lot of flooding up there, just like we do in this part of the coast. And some of the lawmakers were like, this flooding is crazy, like what are we gonna do? And thankfully, some of the environmental lobbyists, like sort of Coastal Conservation League and some of our partners came into play and said, you know what you can do about flooding? We could do some resilience work. And no one ever said the word climate change, okay? Right? Messaging is important. Words are important. So no one ever said, well, you know, that's climate change. People just said, let's address flooding, okay? And so this came from a perspective addressing flooding. Conservative lawmakers from the North Coast led this. We're a very red state house anyway, and conservative lawmakers from that part of the coast led the fight to create the Office of Resilience. Luckily, leadership was behind them. Governor Henry McMaster was all about it. Speaker of the House was all about it. Chairman of Ways and Means. I mean, you had several layers of leadership. We're very interested in creating an Office of Resilience that could address, basically the fact that we're getting hammered by storms. We are very wet. We're flooding. People are, getting pushed out of their homes. And it kind of came from an emergency management standpoint, but it got us to a point where we are talking about resilience and climate change and what we're going to do about it in South Carolina. So this agency is very young. They're only a couple of years old. Their first plan, half of it was written by Audubon staff. So, I mean, we've been working very, very closely with them. And it's part of it is also looking at protecting land. It's also like, well, what land should the state own and we not try to put houses on? So you're going to see a lot of different land protection projects coming about on the South Carolina coast. They're really starting on the coast. The state is literally putting millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into buying land that should not be developed on the coast from a resilience perspective. That's just one of the many things they're doing. They're also just working with cities and counties across the state. Y'all, it's very cool. So, I don't think it gets enough attention, but that's just wanted to make sure y'all knew that that was a thing that existed and has a lot of potential. And, all right, healthy forests. The majority of South Carolina is forested, and the majority of it's in loblolly pine. I know y'all know your pine trees, right? Right, everyone does, right? Loblolly. So South Carolina timber is our #1 industry. We make a lot of money off of pine trees. A lot of money off of loblolly pine. Loblolly pine's cool. It's like corn. It's, so when it's interesting. Before this, I didn't know that much about forestry before I started this job. I'm an ecologist, but I didn't know that much about forestry and timber. And I have learned a lot. So, for instance, when you go by a forest that is just loblolly pine, it's like looking at a cornfield. It's actually not great habitat for anything. It's great habitat for loblolly, but it's not, that forest is not all forests are created equal. I think that's the right, various things. It's just a monoculture. It's just one species. A healthy forest has multiple species. It has lots of stuff going on at each level. Okay, it has good competition. Trees need competition. Like there's just various things about it. You don't want your forest too crowded. You don't want them not crowded enough, right? There's a magic recipe to making a good forested habitat. And we like to think, well, that's just pristine. Nothing's pristine anymore. Every single acre, humans have done something to it at some point. Okay, like it was farmed or it had loblolly pine that was harvested. So all of it has been altered in some way. And it's a matter of getting back to like, well, what habitat do we need for the species we need to protect in South Carolina? And we've looked at that. We've looked at the places in South Carolina, the geographies we need to protect, and the species we need to protect that are indicators. So bring in our Healthy Forest Program. Right now, our Healthy Forest Program is fairly scrappy. Okay, we only have 17 staff across the state to manage 30,000 acres and do all the other stuff we're going to talk about. So our forestry program is run by, we have 2 certified foresters on staff, and our lead forester is a biologist, a certified forester. He's a retired commercial forester. He's brilliant. I've learned so much about how to manage for these habitats. So not only are we managing the habitat that we own and creating and using bird-friendly forestry practices. Like, we harvest timber and we make money off that. We put it back in the bank to like manage these habitats. And then we're replanting, like we're harvesting loblolly pine, replanting longleaf pine, which is what should be over much of South Carolina. So, you know, we're looking at like, what do we need to replace it with and rebuild a new habitat? And then we're banking that money too and being able to fund the program. But we're also, our lead forester, he's the only bottomland hardwood silviculturalist in the state of South Carolina. We actually tell the Forestry Commission how to manage hardwood forests because no one in South Carolina knows how to do hardwood because they were only taught how to deal with pine. So, I mean, there's just some fascinating, we're the experts in the room. And so we're teaching folks, there we go, it went. So we're teaching folks how to do that, okay? So, for instance, this picture down on the left, that's one of the students from Claflin University. We've had students from Claflin University out learning how to do prescribed burns. Forests should burn regularly. Longleaf pine has to burn to regenerate. It's a healthy, good thing for the system. But, you know, we've altered so much of our land that usually when we hear about fires, we're like, well, that's bad because it's not a natural system anymore. So all these 30,000 acres of land, we're approaching restoration and management in different ways. We also do wetlands mitigation and carbon banking on our land. I mean, again, like we are forever stewards and owners of this land. We want to make sure that we have the money in the bank and the ability to manage them forever. So we have endowments, we have restricted funds. We're like consistently trying to put money back in the bank to take care of it. We work with landowners, okay? So we're working with everything from, there are some farmers near some of our property where we're talking about like, how do you build like pollinator areas and stuff and you know, bring back like quail species, and also it helps your crop yields. We're working with you know, landowners who, okay. So if you think about it this way, you've seen how much the value of property has increased here, right? Okay, so if you are a landowner in rural South Carolina and you have a developer who's like, I will pay you this much to build tract homes, or you can just keep your land. Like, what's the incentive? And you can like sell your property rights and get a conservation easement. Okay, so you can sell your development rights and get a conservation easement. Okay, who has the money for that? That is a very select few of landowners. But if we teach landowners how to make money off of their land and how to do it in a bird-friendly and sustainable way, that changes the game. So that's something we're looking at right now, is how to help landowners, particularly small landowners, make money off their land so they will keep it as protected lands. We keep it out of other uses like developments. And you know, we're able to bring that expertise to the table. All right, coast. This is really Abby's jam. But we have a stewardship program. It's going through transition. We just hired Abby. She's new. Right as we were offering her the job, her supervisor resigned. And so we are rebuilding our program. We're interviewing for our coastal program manager position right now. We're super excited about how Abby in this new role can rebuild our coastal program. But in the meantime, we have a good track record of doing shorebird stewardship on the coast, which we'll talk about. We also use natural climate solutions, so working on natural infrastructure projects. We have a few projects in South Carolina on that now, and protecting those vulnerable bird populations. So we protect, we defend, and we restore. Okay, and we're doing a lot of, you know, this is actually, this map is about 2 years old. We have an even better updated map on looking at what are the areas of the coast that we need to focus on, okay? So we're strategically looking at how we can best use like our limited capacity to make the best bang for our buck in protecting these species.
How do you make that decision? Is it based on data?
Yes. Okay, and I am not the GIS person or the data person, but we are mapping, we're looking at everything from what we know about species, what we know about habitat types. We're also looking at vulnerable communities. We're also looking at, I mean, we have a project, we just got some federal funding last year. Let me see, right here, maybe this is about where Cape Romaine is. What do you think? Did I get it right? You know the state now, right? Yeah? Okay. Okay, perfect. So Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge is a wonderful hot spot. It's between Charleston and like Georgetown. Okay, so on the north side. Awesome National Wildlife Refuge. If you ever find yourself up along the coast, please visit it. It is a great hot spot for species, habitat for our shorebirds, our seabirds, and it gets hammered by every storm. And the communities, the old fishing communities of Allendale, McClellanville, just north of Charleston, are all of a sudden very popular for everyone who's moving to South Carolina. And they are getting a lot of pressure to develop, and stuff is getting very scary from folks are getting pushed out of the community because they can't afford it anymore. There's additional development, all those kind of changes you see when a community gets popular. And so we have a federal grant right now to work on, work with the community to co-create some resilience solutions. So to work on some natural infrastructure solutions. So that project popped because we looked at the data and said this is a vulnerable community that could use help, and it's a hot spot for the species of birds we're trying to protect, for instance. Okay, this is terrible to look at. This is on our website. This is our last shorebird, is it called an annual report? Yeah. Right? So what's interesting, this was the one that was published in 2023. We have 12, did I get that right? 12 or 13 shorebird kind of stewardship areas, okay, across South Carolina, South Carolina's coast. We have 64 acres of nesting habitat that we're protecting through our stewardship program. And it's interesting, we were looking at like human disturbance, for instance. So we have some additional data in here of, we've got 154 active volunteers for last year. We were able to, address nesting birds, and we also tracked human disturbance. This green one down here is dogs. And then boats and people walking through nesting areas. So it's interesting. We're trying to collect that data and work from that. And like I said, we're actually going to be continuing to perfect that program as we bring on Abby and her awesome new coastal program manager. And we've really built it up over the years. So not only have we expanded the stewardship program in South Carolina over the last at least decade, but we're also building it up across the country. So we have similar stewardship programs across the country, which I think, especially for those of you that I know come from other states, we have different coastal programs, across our program areas, and we're learning from each other and sharing that information and continuing to improve. So if you're involved in the stewardship program, thank you very much for doing so. We really appreciate it. And I know you'll be hearing more from Abby as she expands that program. We also work with bird-friendly communities. This is an area that we're also working to improve. We're going to be doing hopefully some hiring and that sort of stuff, continuing to build this out. But we also want to deal with urban areas too. Okay, so thinking about where we have a lot of people living, native plants, lights out campaigns. A lot of our chapters are working on local resolutions. And that sort of work at the local level, and addressing how we can help with urban and suburban habitat. One of our priority species, for instance, is the chimney swift. And they are seeing a rapid decline, and what can we do? They've evolved to need chimneys, and we really have to address this loss of habitat for them as well. So we are looking at some of those urban and suburban species, as well as our charismatic shorebird species. And I forgot to mention shorebirds and seabirds. We had news. So this week, the South Carolina House of Representatives passed a law to make the black skimmer the state seabird. Now, it only passed the House. Hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, it'll pass the Senate. If not, we'll try again next year. It might just run out of time, okay? Not for lack of legislative interest, but for lack of time. But that's really exciting. That's fun. So we're trying to get even more like political attention on the plight of the shorebird and seabird. I promised Jen I would throw in some science. Okay, so some additional science. This is what helps translate to the dots on the map, right? So this is one of our projects, and this is something, if y'all want to hear from our bird scientists, they could come and tell you all about this in another presentation. But for instance, the Swainson's warbler is one that we did a project on tracking, so using geolocators, using nano-tagging. Jen can tell you all about how those work, don't ask me. But they're amazing. So for instance, like that little guy, see that little thing on his back? A way to track him. Jen is our certified bird bander on staff, and so she's the one gluing these things to a bunch of birds. And we are expanding our MODIS network as well to be able to track these. So, those are, we can, I did not bring a picture of a MODIS, but, amazing kind of like antenna. They look like the cell phone tower, kind of, you can attach them to like a cell phone tower. And they can give us additional like canopy information. I mean, we can get detailed info. Like we can track our birds, our prothronotary warblers at Beidler, we can track them down to where they nest in Colombia and South America, so we can get like very specific fine data, and that technology is continuing to improve.
Is that on the website? Like, can you go on, like, find MODIS on your website?
Well, you can use our Migratory Bird Explorer, which is very cool. So like if you want to be like, where are the birds going from my backyard, and you can see where they're migrating to. Yeah. And there may be some stuff on MODIS, but I don't hold me to that.
But on National Audubon, you can.
Yep, if you go to audubon.org, the Migratory Bird Explorer is very neat. The refinement of the data is just stunning where we've come with that. So this is an example of some of the species that we'll dig into further and do projects with. We work a lot with researchers from different academic institutions, whether we're partnering with them on projects, or also we have housing, for instance, at both of our sanctuaries, and we will house researchers and interns and stuff so they can be on site, completing some of these studies.
Excuse me, could you just address how you interface with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and their tagging program?
Yes, all the time. I went out with, when we were tagging Baltimore Orioles, we were doing it with South Carolina DNR. So frequently we are shoulder to shoulder with them, working on the tagging with them to give them an extra pair of hands, because we have a certified bird bander on staff. So we are coordinated with DNR consistently, both in our shorebird stewardship program. We're actively coordinated with DNR. We're actively coordinated with DNR on the science side as well. And on the policy side, we help them get their budget approved at the State House, which is vital. And then, for instance, we also have our prothronotary warbler project. We just got funding. Funding just came through this week. We just got funding from Duke Energy to help us expand this program on the Black River. So like we're looking at different habitats and how we can better track these prothronotary warblers, which, have you all seen the prothronotary warblers at Beidler? It's very cool. And they are out. They are covering Beidler Forest right now, and it's very fun. So if y'all can make it up to Beidler, I recommend. And these teeny little birds travel so far. So it's very cool to study them. All right. So I've mentioned our sanctuaries. Okay. So we have Beidler and Silver Bluff. This is one of our interns that worked out at Beidler. I think he's working at the South Carolina Aquarium now. So Beidler Forest, like I said, is turning 50. It is 18,000 acres in the swamp. We built a visitor center to go with it, and its birthday is May 11th. So if y'all want something to do, come out May 11th to Beidler. We have a great food trucks, activities, like all kinds of stuff happening that day. We use it as an opportunity to promote, the way I see it, our sanctuaries are our front porch. Like, this is how we talk to the public, how we work with communities, our neighbors, our folks internationally come to visit these sanctuaries. And so this is also where we can promote our equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging values. So this is where we can connect more with the people side of our work. We are working to enhance our visitor experience and programming. So we hadn't really updated our interpretation, our exhibits at Beidler in 30 years. And so there's a lot we're doing right now to improve that visitor experience at both sanctuaries. Everything from just improving our signage and wayfinding. The first time I drove out to Silver Bluff, I thought I was going to end up on someone's farm, and it was not going to be good. So just making people feel comfortable going out into rural South Carolina and finding these special places, but then also talking about the spaces themselves and the natural history and the cultural history. So for instance, Beidler is on the, 2 years ago, we got put on the National Park Service Network to Freedom Underground Railroad System. So we actually have proof that we were part of the Underground Railroad in South Carolina. And now we're a designated site on the National Park Service Network to Freedom. But we don't talk about that enough. And so that's going to be something we share in an update of our interpretive experience at the Visitor Center, for instance. We're also the cultural land of the Edisto Natchez Cuso tribe. And so we're working with them to share the story of their land at the center. At Silver Bluff, it's 3,400 acres that was a part of Governor Hammond's plantation. Governor Hammond was a massive plantation owner in that part of the state, and he was also a pretty awful, as far as plantation owners go, really bad. And so we have a couple of enslaved people cemeteries on site. We have a couple of archaeological digs happening. We were also on a 50-foot bluff of the Savannah River, and we're this interesting trading post for different Native American Indian tribes. We have all this history we're not sharing with visitors. We talk about the birds, but we haven't talked about the people part of it. And so that's something we're going to be integrating into our visitor experience as we move forward. And we're also making sure that right now, so Beidler turns 50 this year, Silver Bluff turns 50 next year. I want to make sure we've got another half century ahead of us at least, right? We are the forever stewards, and so we want to make sure both our sanctuaries have endowments, but we're working to build those. I want a healthy savings account for both of these sanctuaries to make sure that we can continue to be the forever stewards of these places under our care.
Does the Audubon magazine help at all?
I hope so.
I'm just curious.
I know
Feature stories on, yeah, you got a lot of birds. There's always a bird on the cover. It's great, beautiful.
Sometimes they do. To be honest, the magazine feels like a separate entity sometimes.
Yeah, it seems like it's such a ripe opportunity to promote things other than birds.
Right. Well, and just recently they were promoting. Yeah, well, and just recently our communications team at HEG, we're such a big organization, and our national communications team was promoting Corkscrew. It's a really cool sanctuary and center in Florida, but we're better. And they're turning 70, and they're promoting that, and they haven't been promoting our 50th birthday. And so we're constantly kind of jockeying for that, unfortunately. But they did just run a really cool story on some of our healthy forest work. So we're getting in there, we're getting our name out. Part of it is, self-promotion internally too, and we hadn't been doing that well, and that's one of the things in my tenure to make sure that we're also on the map internally as well, and we're getting the attention we need. But yeah, I know, because people love the magazine's awesome. And so I want to lean into that even more, because we have some really cool places. A national staff visited this week, and she has visited almost all of our centers and sanctuaries, and she said Beidler's better than Corkscrew, and she said Beidler was her favorite. And I'm quoting, we've been recorded, I'm quoting it, okay? So I'm just saying. So I'm very excited about our centers and sanctuaries, and that's a lot of what I've done in this first year. Okay, whoop. All right. So on the left, we have Silver Bluff. Not a lot to it, bless its heart, okay? It's a very bare bones sanctuary. Silver Bluff, that is a cinder block building, y'all, with no insulation. And this is our entrance. It looks like a farm, okay? So in winter of this year, we secured a six-figure gift from an anonymous donor, and we are about to embark on a lot of infrastructure upgrades. It's not gonna let us replace a cinder block building yet, but guess what's missing from Silver Bluff right now? What's like one thing you really want when you visit a place? Restrooms. There is no potty. No public potty. So, you know, we don't have a visitor center. Like, this is just an office, and we have 1.5 staff at Silver Bluff, okay? And one of the guys lives on site, but like, he can't be here all the time. They're in the woods. They are foresters. They're out there doing the management and restoration. So we don't have any public restrooms for people, and it is remote, okay? And so the first time I went out there, I was like, oh, well, that's a problem. And so I've spent the last year raising the money for it. We are about to install 2 different restroom facilities. At Silver Bluff, we're fighting with DHEC about our well permit at the moment. You know, we're doing a lot of infrastructure upgrades, because guess what happens when you turn 50, right? Like, stuff starts breaking. Okay, right? We've all been there. And so, you know, we've got aging septic systems, aging wells. You know, I mean, the infrastructure is aging. And so it's not sexy, okay? But, you know, we are doing some of these really needed improvements. Also, let's see, we're doing little things like improving our road, improving some of our structures. Right here, right now is just like a scrub forest, and it's not like a healthy habitat forest. So we are shifting it into a 50-acre meadow. It's gonna be so beautiful. It is already so cool. So, you know, because we need different types of habitat, right? You need grassland habitat, like different habitats for different species. Silver Bluff has, just for my birders in the room, we have brought back amazing populations of Bachman sparrow, bobwhite quail, wood storks. We have some managed ponds where we have inland shorebirds. Y'all, Silver Bluff is cool, okay? Like, if you have never been through a southern forest and surprised cubbies of quail, you have not lived. So please go visit Silver Bluff. It's actually, I don't play favorites, but it's one of my favorites. And then we've got Beidler. Oh, sorry for this mic. We've got Beidler on the right. So this is our visitor center. You may not be able to tell, but that is a brand new paint job, okay? So Beidler was just went through a big renovation. The team actually had a restricted fund that they didn't realize they had, that they could spend on renovations. And so part of taking over a new team is kind of cleaning up some of the finances, making sure staff know the resources they have available to them. So, so we have spent, actually, the National Audubon Society Board gave us some money for deferred maintenance at both centers. That was really, really cool. And so that helped us leverage funds. And so we've been able to do a full renovation of the Beidler Center. It was very wonderfully 70s. It was a very great orange aesthetic, threadbare carpet, aging toilets. I've done a lot of restroom work. I did not expect that in this role. But so we have completely redone the visitor center. It is absolutely stunning. And I encourage you to go out there. We're also working to improve. We have 2 different cabins at Beidler and 1 cabin at Silver Bluff for researchers and interns and that sort of thing, and maybe donors one day, and like things we can offer to guests. And so we're also now working on improving those facilities. Right? I'm in. Exactly. So, so these are great improvements. I will say our boardwalk is in great shape. I've been getting questions from folks that are asking about our boardwalk. We use an amazing tropical wood, and I'm trying to remember the name. It's really funky. I'll remember it later. But that boardwalk, a tree actually just fell on the boardwalk last week. It was fine. Totally fine. No damage. So, so we continue to maintain the boardwalk well. It's a 2-mile loop if you have not been out there. Also during COVID, we opened up an upland grassland trail That's very cool too. We have a rebounding population of bobwhite quail and turkeys and stuff hanging out on that trail. And so you can see your bottomland hardwood forest. This is the largest stand of cypress tupelo old growth forest in the world. But you can also see grassland species at Beidler. So, I mean, y'all, they're cool. If I've not convinced you of anything yet, go visit our sanctuaries if you can. And that's everything about Audubon I wanted to tell you, but I wanted to have some time for questions. So, what you got?
Question, just because I'm not familiar with Audubon around the country, do other states also have sanctuaries, or is this unique to South Carolina that we have these two sanctuaries?
I don't know every program in and out, so I can't speak for every. Like, I think we have about we're in 17 places, and a lot of our states have been regionalized, so they've been kind of consolidated. So we have, Audubon Great Lakes and Audubon Rockies and Audubon Southwest. So there's been a lot of regionalization. I'm holding out. South Carolina is unique.
I'm from Connecticut, so we have two. We have one in Sharon.
Yeah, you've got a couple in Connecticut, and New York has a lot. New York has a lot. So, some places have a lot of centers and sanctuaries, some have very few. It really differs. And they look different. I mean, my friend that runs Audubon Great Lakes, they have a farm on in their portfolio. She had to help birth a calf the other night. I didn't see that in the job description, but it seemed very cool.
Toilets in the job description.
Right?
Exactly.
Right? And
There
so.
will be more surprises down the road.
Right. I mean, so I definitely think our center and sanctuary network is one of the defining features of National Audubon Society that is so very unique and cool. And there are definitely people that go around and try to visit all of them. And I mean, it can be quite an experience. So I think we have them just about everywhere in some form or fashion. I know that in South Carolina, especially for the size of our state office, we own a lot of land. They frequently don't know what to do with us. They're like, well, why are you owning so much land? And we're like, because we're really good at it. And we have such a good track record. We're one of the most respected large landowners in the state. And so, we've got folks, I mean, when and Governor McMaster, one of the legacies he wants to leave after his governorship ends, he wants to protect, he wants to more than double the amount of protected lands in South Carolina. And he feels very passionately about this. He actually, the other day, we said, well, yeah, we're going to double the production. He goes, no, Becca, we're going to more than double. You were not thinking big enough. Okay, so I mean, we have a state, and he's just representative of, the kumbaya, bring everybody together along both sides of the aisle issue in South Carolina is land protection and conservation. And so we have a state that supports it, that puts money into it, that is really all about it. And so, as a respected landowner in the state, we have a place, we're in the room where it happens. We have a place at the table for those discussions. And so, I want to continue to be a big landowner in South Carolina. I think that's something we've been good at and we're going to lean into. And we're very good at land management, and we're very good at teaching other people how to do it well. We're a very respected voice in that space. And I don't think that's true in all of our states and regions across the country. I mean, that's a bit, sometimes I don't think they know what to do with us, because we make money off of it. Like I mentioned, we do wetlands mitigation, we do carbon trading, we do timber harvesting. We also have we also support 36 hunting and fishing leases on our property. It's passive income. Also, having hunters on our property helps us deal with poachers and other issues. It's more eyes on the land. And we don't allow them to hunt feathers. That would be a little on the nose. But they hunt hogs and deer, which destroy the habitat and are not, we need help managing those populations that are growing out of control. Just last year, my sanctuary manager at Beidler, who is a retired Marine sharpshooter, Mark, he killed over 600 wild hogs on Beidler. And we still have not made a big dent in the population. Wow. They have multiple litters a year. I mean, it is, a lot. So there are things like that we know we're struggling to manage, and we're able to help pay for that with the hunting and fishing leases on our property and spread goodwill in the community. Like the community members have grown up in those hunting and fishing clubs and still feel connected to their land. So, other questions?
A little bit different, but so there's National Audubon, and then there are some states that have their own state Audubon. Like I come from Maine, so there's Maine Audubon, which I don't think is really under the national. I was just wondering if you could describe.
There are some states that have chapters. Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't know Maine that well, but like in Georgia, for instance, Georgia does not have a state office, but the Atlanta chapter, so separate 501c3, has a chapter agreement with Audubon. They have expanded. They've been around for so long that they've expanded to cover the state, and so now they're like, well, actually they just changed their name, like Bird, Georgia, or something like that. But they are a statewide chapter now. So there are cases like that, and those are that is that weird chapter versus National Audubon. We're cousins, but we're separate 501c3s. Versus me running a state office, I do not have to run my own 501c3.
You're under the national umbrella?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't have my own board. I get overhead, like I pay National Audubon Society for overhead support, but that means I get like HR stuff and finance assistance and development assistance, and I don't have to hire those people out of my budget. But I do kind of eat what I kill. Like if I can raise the money to expand my program, I can, go from there. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Another question, just because I'm newer here and trying to figure out, so we have the sign at the gate entrance.
Oh.
What does the sign mean?
Oh.
Can you tell me?
Luckily, I prepared for this question. Okay.
Well, I'm sure everybody else in the room knows the answer, so.
Well, and Mary.
No, that's exactly why she knows that this question might come up.
Yeah, and Mary can send you. You can feel free to like share some of the stuff we emailed about.
Yeah.
Okay, Audubon International is not affiliated with National Audubon Society in any way. Audubon International is a greenwashing organization that certifies golf courses as bird friendly. It is not based in anything scientific. And there's some stuff on the internet that's very interesting. Mary could share with you some articles I found. And the urban legend at Audubon that I've heard from veteran staff is that there was like a lawsuit that we didn't win.
Maybe about using the name.
That allows them to.
Yes, I mean they are using, Audubon is very,
Essentially stole a brand.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, because Audubon is very well branded as a bird conservation organization, and so it's a way to say that they have like a bird-friendly golf course, but it's not based in anything from what I can tell. Now, that being said, we recently, and I cannot remember the details, but Jen was telling me, we recently have partnered with Audubon International locally on something positive in an area. So like, that's not to say it is a completely burned down relationship, but it is not National Audubon Society.
So the sign out front has nothing to do with you?
Nope.
It's totally
Or the state or the
totally
national?
separate.
No, totally golf course related thing.
Yeah.
Hmm. I know, it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky.
And a related question then, so DeVoe Bank, which
Whew.
is the bird sanctuary,
Mhm.
it's where all of the birds go to nest, and every talk that we go to, people talk about how important it is, it's critical, yet you see boats going over there, you see people getting out, and then we got a notification that there's certain parts that are closed off right now because of the pelicans, but who manages it?
DNR.
Well, why not, you work with DNR or no?
We partner with DNR. Like, actually, I think that was part of my hazing last summer. Is they made me go out with augers and put in signposts to like shut down parts of it, because like basically all but like an end is shut down during nesting season from landing boats, et cetera. And so they just like have to post these signs. These brave women, it's like a total female team at DNR, and they're just,
And there's only 4 of them in the whole state.
dude,
Which
they
is
are
insane.
so understaffed and under-resourced, and they're amazing. And they were, I mean, I'm like, okay. And they're like, jump off the boat, Becca, with the auger, and like take the fence. And I was like, y'all do this by yourselves? Are you kidding me? So, I mean, they're amazing. So no fault of DNR, okay? Right? Like sometimes things are bigger than the state staff, okay? This is political. Like culturally, historically, enough people with power have enjoyed visiting DeVoe Bank. And
Who owns the property? Does it belong to the state of South Carolina?
Yeah.
It must be. I mean, is
I
that
know
where
it's-
DNR gets it?
okay, you know what? I'm just gonna, let's see. Okay. We'll just turn you off. How's that? I'm on this. I still got this going. So we're still going to be good with the recording. Okay, so
I'm wondering if it has something to do with just with ownership. And that
It's
DNR
not-
steps in and really nobody else can.
it's the state. It's the state. You know, DNR is wonderful. They are not going to do something that lawmakers might disagree with. Lawmakers listen to constituents.
So that's where the political.
People with power have voices. So I think there has been a history there. There was a really good article in the Post and Courier today about it. I've not read the whole article. You know, some folks are pushing hard to fully close it. You know, it lost some land. I mean, these islands are moving, okay? Like they're moving. We're constantly losing and gaining habitat. You're always having erosion and accretion. We also have sea level rise. Like we are losing habitat. Like that is happening. And a bit of that is natural. Like eventually we are going to lose our coastline if things continue. And these islands have always moved to a certain extent. So that is a thing. But yes, there is an effort to get the end of it closed. I think it is above DNR's head. Okay, I don't think this is a like beat up on DNR staff issue. I think this is a lawmakers. I think this is a DNR board. There is a board at DNR. There's a board issue, and
That's not the only island. You got, I mean, there's plenty out there. that you
but
have to
that's the only one that is partially open.
As such an important, critical.
Yeah.
How do you release it, like you said?
DeVoe is unique in terms of this like halvesies, okay? Like most of the ones that DNR manages or the feds manage, because some are in like the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge, for instance, has some similar ones or having similar issues. But like those are all closed. You know, all the rest of them are closed, at least during nesting season. You know, like they don't allow boat landings. And I think DeVoe is confusing. It's it's kind of, I think you should do like all or nothing, right? Like, but so we are engaged in that conversation. I know there was an article today. You know, different folks have different feelings about tactics, and you know, it's going to be tricky. But I do think this is a good opportunity to like share with your elected officials, et cetera, how you feel about it. I mean, that you know, this is an important time to share that voice and to be engaged in it. And you know, I have not talked to the senator for the area yet, and that's a conversation I want to have with them. You know, like there's some more discussions that need to happen, and so I don't want to speak too soon on some of that, but I do think there's some room for advocacy and for communicating that, because you know, a lot of it is, well, the people want it, and well, who? You know, and how do we manage that? And can we close it at least during nesting season, you know, migratory seasons, et cetera? So that is a conversation. Are y'all familiar with Crab Bank, for instance? So, I mean, Crab Bank is an example of, you know, habitat we lost that was restored with spoiled dredge material. Y'all familiar with that? You know?
Like, it's not a Shen's Creek or. Yeah. That's over near there.
So, when there's dredging to deepen places, using that material, but that is such a, and it works, but getting the feds to do that over cheaper methods is what's tricky. And so that there are some discussions about putting the pressure on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and so there's some ongoing things like that may be able to help places like DeVoe Bank. There were some people that contacted me about wanting to go do that on DeVoe Bank, and I was like, it would take a few years to make that happen, and you can't just, dredging is also really terrible for the environment. You shouldn't go dredge just to restore the habitat. If there's dredging that's gonna happen and you wanna use that material well, great, but it's not a easy answer. These are different things we're looking at. We are working with an engineering firm for a similar island, Marsh Island, in the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge that's losing habitat dramatically. We're working with an engineering firm to come up with some creative solutions for how to kind of rebuild some habitat. I mean, there's a lot of people working on what do we do about shorebird and seabird nesting habitat off the South Carolina coast. I think the fact remains that we're losing habitat. We're going to continue to lose habitat. We're going to continue to have people move here. We're going to continue to have sea levels rise. And so, it's just a matter of what can we do now and what can we do as long as we can. And then what do we do next? This is the way I'm thinking about it.
Just a comment, we were talking about the crab bank. I went to a presentation about that restoration. It was very successful. I was very impressed because it involved so much cooperation between the federal government, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and it just so happened that the Army Corps of Engineers were dredging that, and they have a cooperative, they have some mandate that if it can be used, if the material they remove can be used, they should need to give it priority to conservation. And this was kind of like the perfect storm where everything happened well. It was just, I was really amazed. I was heartened to think that, that they can actually get it done.
It can be done. It can be done. It took years and it took a lot of money. It took kind of everyone dropping everything and focusing on that, which is very cool. But then it's also oh gosh, we have so many. And how do we do that sustainably? And it happened to work in that case, but the Army Corps isn't always that agreeable, And so, yeah, navigating some of that has been fascinating.
But one of the things was, it was a national shipping channel that they were dealing with. I mean, there's not a national shipping channel near DeVoe, so that perfect storm's not gonna happen.
Right, and there are people that worked on Crab Bank that are trying really hard to make that happen for DeVoe, and I'm not as optimistic, But people are digging into it. I mean, there's our group and several other groups engaged, that were engaged with Crab Bank that are trying to coordinate on it. But we shall see. I think Crab Bank might have been a little unique, unfortunately and fortunately. So.
Well, listen, if you have any other questions, Rebecca will be around, but let's thank her for coming out and for this update.